Right. The rest of the show is one article that started off somewhere around a 600-word piece and ended up 5,000 plus. It nearly turned into a From Russia with Love plus. And this is what started it off was part of an article by Ralph Ellis that will have interest, and I will be adding important insight and background knowledge to it all. And he asked the question, have King Solomon's mines really been discovered? Yes, indeed. In fact, they've been known about for centuries, and modern archaeological work on them started way back in the early 19th century. But the site's true significance has never been realized before, and so their role in biblical and popular history has never been fully understood. My comment, because it's all based on a lie, is why. Ralph then says, and that lacuna in our understanding has stemmed from one fundamental problem. We still do not know who King David and King Solomon really were, nor where their capital city was. And my opinion on that is the fact that they were called mines is a key aspect. Suggests they used slaves to dig for them, which is reminiscent of the Anunnaki story. And perhaps Solomon and David were one of them, ? So Ralph says, so before we can find the legendary gold mines of these famous monarchs, we need to find their true identity. The mystery men, King David and King Solomon. How can this be, he said? Readers may well ask, how can the identities of King David and King Solomon be unknown? Well, one of the primary problems for Judeo-Christian theologians is the disturbing reality that the most celebrated kings of Judaic history cannot be found in the historical record. Oops. Just like the country of Israel then. Are we seeing the pattern yet? Ralph goes on and says, while that may sound unlikely, recent archaeology in the region by Professors Israel Finkelstein and Neil Silberman has demonstrated that Judea was very sparsely populated during the United Monarchy era, while Jerusalem itself was little more than a village. So the central problem that bedevils all historical research into the United Monarchy is obvious. The Tanakh, which is the Old Testament, describes an influential nation and a wealthy society that simply could not have existed in this early era. Kings David and Solomon were supposed to have been the most influential and wealthiest monarchs in the entire region, who had subordinate monarchs paying them tribute in gold and spices. Sounds like the crown. And yet the archaeologists say this is impossible. So how did the Jewish people manage to mislay the region's most famous monarchs? Ralph asked. Well, in my opinion, it's simple. They are rewriting history in their image, just like the Bible is their story, not ours. Ralph said the only conclusion that archaeologists can logically come to is that the Tanakh is a complete fiction and Kings David and Solomon did not exist. Oops. Just like in the real region of Israel and their allies, Egypt, Professor Hawass keeps a tight rein on archaeological discoveries and finds and will not allow opinion outside of the Egypt Jewish narrative. But if Solomon didn't exist, where does the name come from? Is it Sol-Omon or Sol-Amon, which means Ra, the solar god? Ralph goes on, he said it's a controversial problem. The cultural and religious solution to this controversial problem is to tiptoe around these troublesome archaeological findings and pretend that they do not exist. Or they could just declare archaeologists conspiracy theorists and ban them from the sites. Ain't that right, Mr. Hawass? He does it regularly. Ralph says, however, a logical alternative is that we are either looking in the wrong era or the wrong location for the United Monarchy. And so the solution to this perennial problem actually lies in Egypt. And he said, while this may sound like a bizarre suggestion, it does actually make a great deal of sense. Now, in my opinion, the author would benefit greatly by reading the From Russia with Love series, and it makes a whole heap of sense. There was no Israel. It is the fake chimeric gods of Egypt. The Ethiopian gold mine that may have supplied the Queen of Sheba with her riches. Now, my opinion on that is because that is the land of the Cush, and the site of the fourth Garden of Eden is why. Now, the Cush is basically everything south of Egypt. The Cushites all followed Amun-Ra. Now, the Kushite imperial capital was located at Meroe, which is Sudan, during which time it was known by the Greeks as Euthbia, A before Ethiopia. Hence the country known now as Ethiopia, and a former site of the Ark of the Covenant. But where did these Kush people come from? Well, perhaps it goes back to From Russia with Love again, as they originated in the Hindu Kush mountains, from where a particularly potent strain of pot derives. Now, Hindu Kush is generally translated as killer of Hindu or Hindu killer. Ralph then says the legendary Queen of Sheba and her iconic visit with King Solomon. Does newly translated Hebrew text reveal insight into King Solomon's treasures? Joseph Flavius, the 1st century Jewish historian, he came from royal lineage, it is said. He said that the ancient Israelites were the Hyksos pharaohs of Egypt. That's one of their own people. And Ralph said that is a story that he covers in some detail in his book called The Tempest and Exodus. And he said, so originally the Israelites were an almost fully Egyptianized people, which is why they were joined on the Exodus by Apis bull worshippers, he said. Now, my opinion on that is they are not Egyptianized. They are Egyptian natives. Like Moses, which is a title as in Tutmoses. They all came from Egypt. Ralph asked the question, but what if some of these Hyksos Israelite refugees did not go all the way to Jerusalem or came back to Egypt in later generations? They would then be almost indistinguishable from the Egyptian 21st dynasty, which was likewise founded by immigrants. Now, my input on that is, the Apis bull worship is dedicated initially to the son of Hathor. Now, Hathor was a consort of Horus and Ra, and was said to beguile all men and make them fall in love with her, which is a bit like a latter-day CIA honeypot then. Now, initially, Apis, the bull, was assigned a significant role in Hathor's worship, being sacrificed and reborn. They do love their sacrifices, don't they? But later, Apis also served as an intermediary between humans and other powerful deities, originally Ptah, later Osiris, and then Atum. Now, the Ptah were from the Enki and Ra lines, and also Thoth, known as the bird tribe or the winged drac. And so the Royal Draco line, as the Royal Draco line have wings in one of their forms. And they look like angels, not. Now, the reference to the bird tribe is why so many hieroglyphs contain lots of images or symbols of birds. Now, the original, I'll repeat that again, the original Alex Collier spoke of the Ptah quite a lot, and he favoured their group. But I'm not so sure they are to be favoured. To my understanding, the lesser of two evils is still evil. But perhaps the Apis bull is the origin of the papal bull, or perhaps the great book was written for and by these people called the Bible, because that book does tell their story, not ours. Now, Thoth was part of the Nibiruans from the Pleiades, and he was also linked to Rigel in Orion. But it's an interesting word, Pleiades, because the first four letters, P-L-E-I, in Greek means to sail. And the Egyptian hieroglyphs are filled with boats that are perceived to sail the world's oceans. But boats are also called ships that sail the universe oceans called space. As above, so below. But Thoth was also known as a Nubian, which just happens to be the same region as the Cushites. And perhaps a pointer as to who they are is in the description of a Nubian. A Nubian is a member of one of the group of dark-skinned peoples that formed a powerful empire between Egypt and Ethiopia from the 6th to the 14th centuries. Thoth, it was said, has blue-black blood. This is according to Ralph. I'm back on Ralph now. Thoth has blue-black blood. Ralph says, what's the meaning of the phrase blue blood? The blood that which flows in the veins of old and aristocratic families. What's the origin of the phrase blue blood? And he said blue blood is a literal translation of the Spanish sangre azul. Now, this is my input. Sangre azul, hence the royal aspects here, are known as blue bloods compared to sangreal. And Ralph said this was the designation attributed to some of the oldest and proudest families of Castile, who claimed never to have intermarried with Moors, Jews, or other races. Now, the Moors and the Jews are one and the same. And these people connected to the Jews are by fake religion only, created by these fake gods known as the Anunnaki, better known as pharaohs, which means house, the house of the fake gods. Ralph goes on, the expression probably originated in the blueness of the veins of people of fair complexion as compared with those of dark skin. And that was certainly the understanding in the 19th century, and there seems little reason to doubt it. In 1834, the Anglo-Irish children's writer Maria Edgeworth published a novel entitled Helen, which reiterates that opinion. Someone from Spain of high rank and birth of the sangre azul, the blue blood. Now, this is my opinion now. What she was describing there was the Sephardic, who were the conquistadors during the rape of the Americas. Ralph goes on, these days, or no, it's not, Maria Edgeworth says, these days there are fewer people of noble birth who make a point of maintaining a fair complexion in order to display their rank. We are more likely to see apparent blue blood in the extremities of those suffering from the poor circulation condition called Raynaud's. My input, blue or black blood was the reason for the original name for Egypt was Khem, Khem, which means from the blackness. And the term alchemy, now spelt Chem instead of Khem, therefore means the science of making black holes. Alchemy. Now, it was said that Thoth and Hermes' family, who impregnated Akhenaten, which later became the Tut Magdalene story, and the Black Madonna, which is the Dark Mother, and the Kali Ma. Now, Alex Collier said this: the coming from the planet Kehum in the binary Sirius star system. From Kehum perhaps came Kehem. His people were descendants of non-physical beings who inhabited hyperspace, a region of consciousness existing outside of linear time and space. They created the ancient Egyptian civilization as well as the Jewish people and gave them the Torah. And my opinion on that, oh my. The Syrians created Egypt, the Jewish people, and gave them the Torah. Hence the black stone and cube, which came from there also. but perhaps that was the current version of Collier. There is two. Because if he is as connected to the space people as the original one, he would have known that Sirius is a trinary system, not binary. Now, you may also notice the propensity of these beings to use many words that is not a common form of our language, by the use of the letter K followed by an H. Khan, Kahum, Kahem, Akhenaten, Khufu, Tutankhamun, Khafre, and many others. Now, back to the article. It is said that the third intermediate period of the 21st and 22nd dynasties is said to have been ruled by Meshwesh immigrants from Libya. And yet these immigrant Meshwesh were remarkably Egyptianized in both culture and religion, almost as if they had previously been exiled from Egypt. And so the possibility exists that there has been a slight confusion here. Now, my input on that is the Meshwesh and the Israelites are the same people. Indeed, they are. But here is a key point that we made in From Russia with Love coming up next. Ralph said they were both previous exiles from Egypt, and they did not establish their primary capital city at Zion, Jerusalem, but instead they built it at Zoan Tanis in the Nile Delta. My input, yet again, the slight name or letter change alters the whole picture. And like we have said all along, these people have got nothing to do with Jerusalem, Jews, or the modern country known as Israel. Some of the exiled went to Zoan, Z-O-A-N, not Z-I-O-N. Some of them went north to Amman, in modern-day Jordan. Amman, Ammon, Amun, and Ra again. And perhaps there is further clues as to who these people are or were. Ralph said during the late third intermediate period, the Nile Delta hosted the four great chiefdoms of the Meshwesh, each ruled by the great chief of the Ma, M-A. My input on that, the great chief of the Ma is the great chief of the Mother, yes, the Dark Mother, which was represented by Lilith, who is worshipped by the modern-day Jews, because she was the fallen Eve of their peoples, not ours. Lilith, the moon goddess, half woman, half serpent. Remember, the Lord sent the fiery serpents because the alleged Jews disagreed, who is connected to the current moon, which is or was in part a Draco planetoid. The current moon is or was in part a Draco planetoid. Ralph goes on. His next section is called Biblical Kings and Historical Pharaohs. But if the Israelites were the Meshwesh, then the biblical history of the United Monarchy should be directly comparable to the equivalent history of the 21st and 22nd dynasties of Egypt, whose pharaohs ruled at the same time as the biblical kings. This has been deemed impossible and unthinkable, he says, which is why it has been dismissed out of hand and never been investigated. Truth never fears investigation. However, he said, since I don't mind going out on a limb, I compared these two royal dynasties and was surprised to find a great number of similarities between them. For instance, the following table compares the pharaohs of the 21st dynasty with the equivalent ancestors of King David. So this list, the first name is biblical leaders at that time, and the second one is the historical pharaohs. And both of these names were running simultaneously on the same timescale. Ezron or Hezron was known as Ramesses. Ram, biblical leader Ram, also known as the historical pharaoh Ramesses. They both were running at the same time. Amin Adab, also known as Amen Nezbain Bejed or Smendus. Nahshon, also known as Nem-Neshu or Amenen-Neshu. Salmon or Salmon, also known as Sayamun, which looks like the biblical name of Simon to me. Boaz, also known as Baz Uasorkin. Now, Uasorkin I was said to be the son of King Solomon. Obed, also known as Amenen Opet. That one letter change again. And David was said to be at the same time as Persenes II. We'll be back with part 2 shortly. Right, part 2. We'll begin with my input. A lot of the pharaohs' names ends in Hotep, which can mean be in peace. But perhaps more significantly, it means as sacrifice to the name fake god or pharaoh. Amenhotep is a sacrifice to Amun-Ra. And this suggests that Persenes was both king at Tanis, which is Zo-An, not Zion, and the high priest in Thebes at the same time, meaning that he did not resign his office as the high priest of Amun during his reign. My input again. Zoan means migration, spelt as Tsan, T-S-A-N, which if you add an I and reverse the S and T, it becomes Istan. Just like a lot of the countries from the Exodus, the original Exodus out of India, from between India to Egypt. Now, Zoan was the capital of the Hyksos rulers, or known as the Shepherd Kings, in whose time Jacob came into Egypt, and their monuments have been found at that site, which favours the conclusion that it's plain that it was the land of Ramesses. Now, there's a black granite sphinx is also in Zoan, and that is another Sirius stone like the Mecca cube. Now, it also, the granite sphinx in Zoan also bears the name of Kian, who is supposed to have been an early Hyksos ruler. Remove the I and you have Khan. Now, the Hyksos type are said to have had broad cheekbones and a prominent nose. That sound familiar? And is not unlike the features of the native Egyptians either. In fact, the word Hyksos means the ruler of foreign lands, which sounds just like the sub-grey race to me. Now, Zoan is recorded to have worshipped no Egyptian gods, but only Set, or Sutek, who is also adored by Syrian Mongols, who were also known as the Hittites. Syrian Mongols, oh my. The Khanites from Mongolia proves another line in From Russia with Love. Now, at Bubastis, this deity is called Set of Ramesses, which may indicate the identity of Zoan with the city Ramesses. So Ramesses is not a name of a pharaoh, but is another title or place name. And it is said that the Zoans came from Assyria. Well, I never. Because that's the site of the third Garden of Eden region. And they were also said to be connected to another Mongolic tribe called the Minyans. The Argonauts were said to be connected to the Minyans because Jason's mother came from that line. But it's a funny word, that Argonauts, similar to astronauts. Now, nauts means to sail or sailor. And just like the beginning of the word of the Pleiades, perhaps Jason's sailing ship was not on the earth-based oceans, but the oceans of the sky. Now, for further clues, the term Argo brings up interesting meanings as well. Argo is a southern constellation which is part of Canis Major. But there is also another meaning for Argo that is pronounced the same but with an added T on the end, and it means a specialized vocabulary peculiar to a particular group of people, devised for private communication and identification, called the thieves' argot. The thieves. So the pirate of the sky ocean came to the sea ocean and went thieving or pirating on the land. Back to Ralph. He said, this clearly demonstrates in year 17 of the 21st dynasty king Siamun from Karnak Priestly Annals fragment 3b, while a second use of the title pharaoh and birth name occurs during the Persennas II reign, where a hieratic graffito in the Ptah chapel of the Abydos temple of Seti I explicitly refers to Persennas II as the high priest of Amun-Re, which is Amun-Ra, king of the gods, the leader, and the pharaoh Persenis. And Ralph said that there are some equivalent sounding names in both the historical record of Egypt and the biblical chronology of the United Monarchy. Indeed, the two royal lines appear to mimic each other remarkably well. But then he said we hit a problem, because the pharaonic king list ends up with a pharaoh called Persenis, Psusennes, whereas the biblical chronology results in King David. And he said, however, whilst these names may look different, there are close similarities between these two monarchs. For instance, King David is known even to this day for his Star of David and City of David. And Ralph says, as it happens, Persenis was called Parsiba Ka-Enuit. Parsiba Ka-Enuit, which means, what they say, my star rises over my city. Now, here's my input into it. Except the word Nuit does not mean city. It is a variation of Nut, the Egyptian sky goddess, often depicted naked over a brother who was also her husband, Geb. And between them they spawned Osiris, Horus, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. Is anyone else noticing that religiosity can bend all the rules and what is considered normal? A man or woman goes into church or elsewhere and says, Jesus came to me last night and spoke to me. And everyone nods and agrees. Yet if a man or woman is in any location and says something non-human came to me last night and spoke to me, or a person says I can hear voices in my head, that is not Jesus, and everyone thinks they're nuts. And it's strange how religion oversteps all of those social norms, just like rocking back and forth and kissing a wall. It defies belief, really. And Ralph said, in which case both Pharaoh Persenis and King David were closely associated with a star and a city. My input, except the word city, did not start until the 1200s. Oops. You see what I mean? It breaks all the rules, including time, it seems. Ralph said, what is the significance of a city gate in the Bible? Besides being part of the city's protection against invaders, city gates were places of central activity in biblical times. It was at the city gates that important business transactions were made, court was convened, and public announcements were heralded. Accordingly, it is natural that the Bible frequently speaks of sitting in the gate, or of the activities that took place at the gate. And the first mention of a city gate is found in Genesis 19-1. It was at the gate of Sodom that Abram's nephew Lot greeted the angelic visitors to the city. In the law of Moses, parents of a rebellious son were told to bring him to the city gate where the elders would examine the evidence and pass judgment. Deuteronomy. And Ralph said this affirms that the city gate was central to community action. To control the gates of one's enemies was to conquer their city, it was said. And part of Abram's blessing from the Lord, oh my God, Anu, was the promise that your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies. Genesis 22-17. So here's my opinion and knowledge on that. The gate was for passing judgment, it said. Central to the community. Control over the gate was essential. Business transactions took place. Public announcements. And at the gate, they greeted the angelic visitors. So given there was no word for city back then, my star rises over my city is a wrong translation. And it sounds like to me the real translation is my star rises over my gate, which means they speak of the stargates, where they greeted angelic visitors. Oh my. The line in Genesis was key to that. Sitting in the gate. Ralph goes on. In the book, I go on to show that Persenis was also called Duad. The biblical king Duad, which is King David in English. Now, Duad is a male Arabic given name and surname corresponding to David. Dawood, D-A-W-O-O-D, circa 1043 BC to 937 BC. The King David of Palestine in Islam, considered to be a prophet and messenger of Allah, in which case there are many similarities between the United Monarchy and the 21st dynasty. That was Ralph. My comment on that is, so David is a messenger of Allah and the hated Islam spoken against by those of the Jewish faith. But as you can see now, it is one and the same script. Both of your religions are based upon fake Egyptians and an off-world race of parasitic entities. Both of them. Is Isis, Ra, the fake solar god, and El means God, although there is another fake Egyptian god known as El as well. Islam, practiced by the Muslims, is another fake worship of the hidden goddess Isis. Islam means the hidden Isis. Ralph goes on, but if these truly were the same royal dynasty, then everything between them should be the same. And strangely enough, that is more or less what we find. Surprising as it may seem, King David had a daughter who was called Markha Tamar Rumt Kehem, while Pharaoh Persenis had a daughter who was known as Markher Mu Tamat. Markha Tamar or Markher Tamat. And he said the only appreciable difference between the names of these two royal princesses is that the Judean lady had dropped the Mu, the land of Mu. from her second name or title. But he said these similarities do not end with the king and his daughter, they extend much further. So as we look deeper into the history of the pharaoh Persenes, even more connections can be seen. Now the first is the biblical name, the second the Egyptian name, and the third the rank or position. Markah Tamar, or Markher Mutamat, a daughter of the king. Joab, or Joab Emphjed, an army commander of the king. Hiram Abif, or Hiram Atif, a chief architect of the king. And he said, contrary to popular perceptions, we see here conclusive links and similarities between the supposedly distinct and separate monarchies of Egypt and Israel during the 10th century BC. My comment is, except unbeknown to the author, there was no Israel. The house of, yes, but never a country until the dark forces and magicians installed it in 1948. The author says, do remember that these two monarchies existed at exactly the same time, as the Tanakh itself makes perfectly clear. And he said, if the truth were known and its implications understood, the Israelite United Monarchy and the Egyptian 21st dynasty were one and the same. And he said, the story of the Tanakh is, in fact, the history of the new Lower Egyptian pharaonic line. This discovery, he said, is interesting on so many levels, but one thing it can do is point us towards the true location of King Solomon's mines. Now we know that King Solomon was a member of the 21st or 22nd dynasties and Egypt, not Israel. Then those famous mines must have belonged to the Tanis pharaohs, which is Zoan, not Zion. So where the gold mines of the Tanis pharaohs? And he said, actually, rather than being in Ethiopia or southern Africa, they were located in Upper Egypt. And he said, we shall discover their surprising location in part 2 of this article. And what the author goes on to suggest is that Solomon's mines were actually the Valley of the Kings, where vast treasures were contained within. And the pharaoh, Uasorkon I, said to be the son of King Solomon, compiled an inventory of the treasures that had been presented to the various temples in Egypt. Now the listed items comprised of 20,500 deben, which is 2 tons of gold, and 72,800 deben, which is 7 tons of silver, while the larger donations or grand total suggest another 200 tons of silver and 230 tons of gold and silver were in the temple inventories. In the Valley of the Kings, where the only tombs were found, there was never tombs in the pyramids. Ever. A sarcophagus, yes, of which healing can take place. So where did all that treasure go? Well, it was stolen by the Greek and Roman armies that are connected to the Roman Church that later became the Vatican. Now you know why the Vatican won't open its archives and has sealed treasure bunkers with armed Swiss guards. Swiss means twin sisters, as in ISIS. Are you connecting the dots now? And the Greek-Roman smash and grab was largely involved around Alexander the Great, and now Egypt has a city named after him. Julius Caesar, the original JC. Mark Antony and Cleopatra, who was an enigmatic figure that had all the hallmarks of the return of Hathor to me. Seductive, said to lure all men. It's all very Hathor. But Cleopatra was part of the Ptolemaic. And one wonders if Ptol, P-T-O-L, is actually Ptol, Ptolemaic, that we mentioned earlier. Now there's a stone tablet called the Cartouches of Cleopatra and Caesarion on a limestone stele of the high priest of Ptah in Egypt, dated to the Ptolemaic period. Perhaps that reveals it. The Ptolemaic are the Ptah. But there was one curious thing that has not really been revealed about Cleopatra, as it is said that Cleopatra could speak multiple languages by adulthood, and she was the first Ptolemaic ruler to learn the Egyptian language. No surprise there. But Plutarch implies that she also spoke, wait for it, Ethiopian. She spoke the language of the troglodytes. Now the troglodytes were known as cave dwellers. Anyone ask why a royal queen would speak to cave dwellers? Perhaps because they were often described as human-looking reptilians is why. Oops. Cleopatra also spoke Hebrew or Aramaic, Arabic, the Syrian language, perhaps Syriac, Median and Parthian, and she could also apparently speak Latin. Well, I never. Although it was said her Roman contemporaries would have preferred her to speak in her native language, Koine, K-O-I-N-E, which is Greek. Does anyone else think that is kind of odd? It's difficult enough to learn one or two languages now with the internet, and yet she learned all of those languages even though books were kind of limited at the time. And one has to wonder whether Cleopatra was chipped And it's all very reminiscent of the Stargate series, the Goa'uld, who were the fake gods and fake Egyptians. They were the Hebrew Anunnaki. In the Aladdin series, The Return of the Jaffa were the genies or the jinns, the dark magicians. The Goa'uld are a race of sentient parasitic beings that take over hosts. And for further proof, the main warriors that protected the Goa'uld fake gods in Egypt were called the Jafar, pronounced in the show as Jafar. But there is a place in the same region that has undergone the atypical name change that is synonymous to these entities, because Tel Aviv was known previously as Jafar. Final portion of tonight's show, and we're going to go in a bit more. There was a mention earlier of SETI, which is Set. And NASA pay homage to him with the acronym SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. But SET or Sutek also ends in a KH, or in Greek known as Seth. Of course, there's another fake Seth and all the channeled books by Seth, which was voice-to-head technology. Channeling was largely done by the Greys. But the fake Egyptian god Set is said to be the god of deserts, storms, disorder, violence, and foreigners in ancient Egyptian religion. Go back to 1991 and 2002 and get Set for Operation Desert Storm makes more sense now. Set, god of deserts and storms. The god of the deserts is perhaps suggestive that he was the user of the Fash weapon which created the deserts here, because we had no deserts here prior to that weapon being used. Now Set is the son of Jeb and Nut, Nuit, the sky. His siblings are Osiris, Isis, and Nephthys, and Set, like Thoth, was avian. And he killed his sibling, which was perhaps also his brother, given of the incestuous nature, Osiris, which is a common theme amongst the biblical scripts and also amongst the Elites here. Like Cain and Abel, it's all the same story of power. He married Nephthys and fathered Anubis, and in some accounts he had relationships with the foreign goddess Anat and Astarte. And from these relationships, it is said there was born a crocodile deity called Maga. Those are the same entities that worked alongside the Abraxans in Jupiter Ascending. But what is Maga? Well, Maga in Latin means magic, magical, and witch. In Italian, sorceress or witch. In Spanish, magician or wizard or illusionist. In Polish, magician. In Sanskrit, magician or priest of the sun. Set was an ally of Ra, who gave himself the title of the solar god or being, hence the priest of the sun. There are also interpretations of the name of Cyrus, identifying with or referring to the Persian word for sun, again, which is a reference to Ra and the solar god with his ally Set, which is why we refer to the sun setting. It's going dark. And they also pay homage to Set in the game of tennis, where love equals 0. But remember our show titled Have the Gods Returned? We referenced Macron and a guy named Trump, labelled as Cyrus, which the Jews did a coin representing and honouring Trump as that god. Now Cyrus was the winged god of Syria, and perhaps the term MAGA now has a whole new meaning. Make America Great Again, or crocodile worship related to the god Set and ultimately Ra. And here's one of Trump's own tweets. He said last year was the best year for American manufacturing job growth since 1997, or 21 years. The previous administration said manufacturing will not come back to the US. You would need a magic wand. I guess I found the magic wand and it's only getting better, Trump said. MAGA, magic wand. And there are several other quotes of him referencing the word magic. Trump, of course, was connected to the trustee for a while. Is there other connections between Trump, Cyrus and the trustee? Try this. Cyrus Bortel, from the animated TV series called Kim Possible. Now, Bortel in Indonesian means, rather amusingly, a carrot. Now, given there was a member of Kim's alleged security team who has had a major film made in his name, one does wonder these days if that applies here as well. The security team here were to handle Kim, not protect her. Now, in the TV series Kim Possible, Dr. Cyrus Bortel is a brilliant but eccentric scientist who has a talent for producing mind-altering technology. And some of his inventions have been called ferociously unethical, and not surprisingly, this has made his work the target of Dr. Draken more than once. Although a gifted scientist, Dr. Cyrus Bortel's focus on his work was such that he habitually ignored ethical guidelines and common sense to a certain extent. Ironically, Kim's handler boyfriend was a gifted scientist also. In the show, Cyrus, upon completing his modulators, MOOD, modulators, for example, his main concern was which government agency he would auction them off to, and not for increasing his security, despite his last invention having been stolen upon completion. Again, that echoes Kim's former boyfriend. Dr. Cyrus Bortel first requested Team Possible's help when Dr. Draken and Shigo stole his neurocompliance chips. And Draken used the chips on Shigo and Kim Possible to obtain their total obedience, but Jim and Tim Possible used their handheld silicon phase disruptors to override the chips. Does art imitate life? One has to wonder and ask, because there is eerie similarities in this narrative. But Dr. Bortel was again targeted by Draken during Kim's junior year. Draken is another word for Draco. And Draken attempted to steal Bortel's electron magneto accelerator, but Team Possible intervened. And during the battle, Bortel's mutilators landed on Kim and Shigo, and Ron Stoppable accidentally dropped the communicator, Kim-unicator, and picked up the mutilator controller instead, though the oversights were not noticed at the time. Ron inadvertently activated the modulators, which caused Kim and Shigo to react according to the controller's setting, which includes sadness, anger, and love. And once Draken discovered this, he attempted to take advantage of Kim's modulator and set them on anger, but ended up overloading it. Now one goes beyond wondering with that line. Shigo's modulator was presumably removed later, though when last seen it was still set on anger as she chased Draken. That's the story of Kim Possible. Now, whether this is indicative of Kim or not, it does bear pondering over, as the Kim we all knew is a far cry from the current version. To add deeper mystique to it all, it is said that Kim had installed an AI brain interface chip in her head when she was a child. And this was supported by her alleged cousin and Langley 2 agent, Anna von Reitz. And also the result of some people being able to see. It cannot be removed without destroying the host. And in my opinion, it is another trick M and his cohorts played on her, I would suggest, taking the piss, and a backup plan should she succeed in deleting him, which she did with others. And the controlling chip can only be removed or dealt with by the host. And to do that, the host has to go within, something she has failed to do throughout my time with her or since, although I tried many times. And so subsequently, the host suffering badly continues at a pace. And like I was told by higher-ups in May of last year, this is Kim's mess to fix, and I shouldn't play the rescuer again, like I had done on at least 2 or 3 occasions previously for her. This time, they said, it is all down to her. She can be the Queen of the Nile, the Queen of Denial, or a light for the people. It's her choice now. This has been the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. My name's Thomas Williams. Bye for now.